Welcome to part 2 of getting the best sound out of your Boss GX-10. For today's video, I want to cover just a couple of more detailed things that are going to include some of the other settings that I am changing inside of the device. It's going to include things like setting a preset or a tone that's going to work across all of my pickup choices. Additionally, I want to talk about things like wet-dry rigs and parallel splitting signal chains. Part 1 of this series only covered a straight-through chain, and I highly recommend you start there if you haven't seen that video already. Lots and lots of great guitar presets use just a straight signal chain that never branches, never goes into stereo, any of those kinds of details. But for this video, we're going to get into some of that more advanced stuff. Maybe you still haven't found a great way to get a preset that you love following the first video. Maybe there's some details that are still missing, so we're going to see if we can fill in some of those gaps. Before we get started, however, I have to say thanks to Kiko Loureiro for sending me a signed copy of his new album, Theory of Mind. If you haven't listened to Kiko before, he's an insanely great guitarist. I highly recommend that you listen to any of his music. Theory of Mind is his latest release. Highly recommend you check that one out. His open source is also one of my favorite series of his. For today's video, I'm also going to be using one of the picks he sent me, which is an Ibanez Kiko for the duration. If you hear guitar samples through this video, it's coming out of my Charvel Pro mod, and I am plugged into the GX-10 so that we can hear what I'm doing as I'm doing it. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's get this started. So what we're looking at right here is just an empty signal chain inside of Tone Studio. So if I play through my instrument right now, you should hear something that sounds like just a straight guitar sound, straight DI sound, no amp to it. That is just a raw electric guitar with nothing going on. And so this is a good thing to be able to hear through the device just to start, because if you're hearing anything that is not just a nice clean guitar sound with no effects applied, you may have some other things going on here. You could have a cable that's messed up, you could have a pickup going out, the device itself could be faulty, there could be a million reasons it could sound a little bit off. So make sure you have a nice, clean guitar sound to work with before we apply any effects whatsoever. In addition, if you have seen any of my previous videos, you will know that inside of the menu of the GX-10, in the input settings, you do need to make sure that your input sensitivity is set for the instrument you are using today. And the way that you will set that is paying attention to that green meter, and you're going to pick something where you can strum really hard and you want to see it actually start to break up into the yellow and into the red when you strum really hard. That's the correct input sensitivity. You will notice that it will have an impact on your final sound that is small, but it is absolutely there. So make sure that input setting is there, and make sure that that output setting is for the correct device. So in this case, because I'm going directly into the computer, the output select is just for line phones recording. So those two things are just little caveats before we get started. So now let's start messing with some AIRD amps. So the first thing I typically like to do when I am setting up a tone for guitar is I will click on one of these amp settings, and I like to start with something like a natural sound just to hear what these preamps are going to sound like with this instrument. So again, very natural. It's not changing that guitar tone much, it's just amplifying it. So I can go through all the way from my neck single coil, sounds good, all the way over to the bridge pickup. And again, this should sound great because we haven't done much to the sound, we haven't messed with gain a whole lot, we haven't even dived into the territory where things can start to go astray whatsoever. So this is a really nice starting point to get some natural guitar tone. So let's jump up to Boutique, because Boutique should give us an option to start looking at a little bit more grit. Just a little hair on that. Now, one of the things that I consistently find with the instrument that I am playing is the pickups in this are incredibly hot. So for you listening, you might have turned on the Boutique amp and it wasn't driven this much. Part of the reason for me is with these hot pickups, I drive these amplifier presets more than I do with my other guitars. And this is one of the reasons that I have always hated how presets sound, especially when I'm playing through this guitar, because they will have all of these high gain options, and with my hot pickups, they are way over distorted. They're nothing close to what I would want to hear. So one of the very first things that I'm going to do is I'm going to back off the middle gain and move us to a low gain position. And then I'm going to start to play with this gain knob here. And let's back off that just a little bit more. So something a little crunchy. And as you may have heard, that was very, very bright because I was using the bridge pickup. If I switch to something like the neck pickups, very Stevie Ray, right? Just a little crunch. Not a great Stevie Ray tone, but about that level of gain that we're messing with here. So the boutique is kind of nice for that exact reason. And there's a ton here that we could go through, and we could move through those sounds. So what I want to do next, though, is I want to start with this natural sound, because I really like being able to dial some tones that have some nice clean character to them. So let's get started with this natural amp. And the next piece of the puzzle that I typically love to hear is a reverb. So let's go and grab something to get just a little bit more of a wet sound. So let's throw a reverb in here. This one's a Hall. Let's see how we like it. And that's okay. Let me see if we can find one that I prefer a little bit more. Maybe a plate. Just give it a little bit of life. Just a little bit of life. Cool. So now we have a good starting place that we can work from. Nice and clean, not too much going on. So now what I want to mess with is I want to mess with a basic gain type of setting, a drive sort of setting. So I'm going to see if we can pick out an overdrive that I particularly like. Now, a lot of these are, again, going to be very high drive overdrives. So I want to back off just a little bit because I have pretty hot pickups. And then I want to roll that drive in. Cool. So this was a way that I got a very nice drive sound without relying much on the amp, right? I'm in a low gain amplifier. I'm relying on this overdrive pedal to give me something I like. And so this is a really nice way to test out these overdrives, because rather than putting them into an amp with a lot of character, I can really get a sense of the character of these overdrives. So let's check out the blues overdrive. I know this one from the Katana. This one is typically one of my favorite overdrives. Let's hear that one. And now one of the things I really like to do is I'm messing around with the neck pickup when I'm messing with these overdrives. Now I'm going to try a bridge. And one of the reasons that I like to move between these pickups is if I have a preset, I don't want to be stuck using just one pickup for that preset to sound right. I would ideally like to have a very interesting sound across all of my pickup configurations. And that's not always going to happen, but it puts you in a really nice position on a preset if you can find something that's working in several different pickup positions, because now instead of ever touching this preset when I'm playing, I can move between my pickup selectors and reliably know that I have a sound that I like and want to use. So you're going to hear me switching my pickups quite a bit as I'm setting these presets. And so this is how we would have set up something like a really basic signal chain. But one of the ways that we can really get this to start to be dynamic is using the div. So let's see if we can find the div in this long list of things. Okay, here it is. So it's right here toward the end of the list. Div mix. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to put a div mix right at the beginning. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an overdrive over here, And I'm going to put that natural amp over here with the reverb sitting right at the end there. And I'm going to come back and put an additional amplifier in front of that overdriven sound. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what these two sounds are individually, where we have just the natural amp, then the natural amp with the overdrive, and then we're going to play them both. So just to give you a sense of the driven sound. Now switching to the normal guitar sound. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch this to dual so that we can hear both. And I don't know if this comes through super well in the recording, but the sound is immediately bigger, just immediately bigger. And one of the awesome things about doing this is I can keep part of my sound very natural, very clean, and then I can have another part of my sound where I'm getting that hair and that distortion. And when you mix those two sounds back together, you get something that sounds much more full as a consequence of splitting up your tones. So one other thing that I like about tube amps that this modeler isn't giving me much of is a little bit of compression. And so typically having some compression is a good thing when you have a tube amp, because when you start to distort in a tube amp, a little bit of compression comes along for the ride, and that's just inherent to how tubes work. And so what I want is not just that driven sound to be there, but I want it to have just a touch of compression on it. Not much though, so let's see if we can back this down to maybe 30. So as you can tell, it really cleaned up that drive sound. I'm still keeping that natural amplifier sound. And when I come back to mix, I can actually choose how much of each one I want to make it into the mix. So I can make one side of this chain quieter. So for example, I could take A level and I could bring it all the way down to 0, which is effectively just only the natural clean amp sound. But if I bring it back in, we're mixed. Now the B level, I could bring that one all the way down to 0. And now it's only drive tone. So I can adjust the levels of each of these sides, and in addition, I can control what percentage of that sound is going to come from each side, or what ratio is going to come from each side as it's expressed here. So I could say, for example, have 100 to 1A. I could also have 100 to 1B. And you can tell from the sound already that A was, again, this driven sound, and B is this clean sound. And so I can pick how clean or how distorted I want that sound to be based on the ratio. And there's no reason it has to be even, right? I could have way more of the clean or way more of the distortion and drive in the mixture. So one of the things that I encourage you to do is close your eyes when you do this. And part of the reason is your brain might think that there is a correct percentage or proportion of things here somehow. We love even numbers. I encourage you to grab onto this dial right here, close your eyes, and listen. And just let yourself find a position here that your ear likes, rather than just defaulting to a 100-100 balance. It actually doesn't matter a ton here, right? The point is the sound, not the setting. So I'm going to proceed forward with something about 70 to 100. Cool. And this whole time I've been using the bridge pickup for this, so let's see what happens when I move to the neck. I might actually change my mind. significantly more clean. And so with single coils, I inherently tend to like a little bit more of a clean tone, and humbuckers, I tend to like a little bit more of a distorted tone. And so what I'm going to find myself doing here is finding something between this 40 to 100 and 70 to 100 where I'm enjoying the sound all the way across the board. So let's just try splitting it in the middle and see what happens, somewhere around 55. Pretty good. You know, is it my favorite preset that I have ever created? No, but it has a lot going for it. So this is a really basic strategy to get your sound to be a lot bigger, and that is to maintain a certain amount of very natural guitar sound and then mix it in with a sound that is much more impacted. Another fascinating thing that you can start to play with when you do this is things like time-based effects, echoes, can be really interesting when only applied to a single side. So for example, if you're in a spot where only your clean sound is echoing and not your distorted sound, and this is a subtle detail. This is an incredibly subtle detail, but what's happening is the first time my guitar is producing that sound, I'm getting a distorted sound, but all of the echoes are only the clean guitar sound, which is super odd. I could also pick to do the opposite, where all of the echoes are going to be the distorted sound. And so that is a way that you can start to mess with some of your effects because they don't have to be on the entire signal chain. And that's something that you're stuck doing when you have a straight signal chain, is you're stuck with every effect feeding directly into the next effect, where in this case, I can pick how much I want of what and then mix it all back together. And that is a thing that you cannot do on something like a katana or like a single amplifier. The way that guitar players have been attempting to create mixes like this over time has largely been to rely on multiple amplifiers. And so you would see guitar players who'd have on stage an amp that they really liked for a very clean sound, and then they'd have an amp that they liked for more of an overdriven sound, and they would use two amplifiers at the same time to try and get this to happen. But in our case, we can do this without actually having to rely on multiple amplifiers, right? This is a thing that most people coming from regular guitar amplifiers are not going to think to do. They're not going to think to set a signal this way because, well, they're used to setting a regular amplifier. Now, the other fun thing here is I used the same one type of amplifier, and as I mentioned before, most of the guitarists who would run wet-dry rigs would actually have different amplifiers on stage. So let's try this. Let's see if our driven tone was more of a boutique sound, and we're gonna have to reset some of this gain here, but let's see what we can get out of that. So I want a little bit more gain than what we're getting there, so let's see if we can bump that up to a middle. Distorted sound so that you could hear it more in the mix. I would probably sit here and refine a new ratio based on my changes that I applied here. Another thing I could do is come back and just go ahead and go into single side, because ideally, if I like the sound of that distorted guitar on its own. If I like the sound of it on its own, and then I can come back to the other side and I like the sound of it on its own, I'm in a better spot. And one of the things that I'm realizing as I just did that is I actually enjoy the sound of the driven side, but the clean side is a little boring. And that's not bad, but I am curious what we could do if we were to say do something like this, where more reverb is actually going to be applied on the clean side than on the dirty side. And let's see what happens. Let's go back to a dual mode. Really kind of interesting sound. I don't know if I love the space echo for the last thing I played there, but I would leave that space echo there because I would be able to assign it to a foot switch and kick it on when I did want it. But what I really liked about that was that that driven sound didn't have a ton of reverb on it. It actually had none at all, right? It was just straight through. But that clean amp was the one that had all the reverb. And so this is, again, to show that we can create far more dynamic sounds by specifically applying our effects, and we can create much more dynamic sounds by not getting stuck in this idea of what the signal chain should be. So, for example, if I think wet, dry rig, it doesn't make any sense to me to have, say, for example, you know, the supposedly wet side of this not have any sort of reverb and just be drive, and then have the supposedly dry side have the reverb on it. But the thing that I want to stress here about these concepts is not that there is actually one way to do it. What you have to think about is what sound you like to hear. And I really like overdriven sounds that are a bit more dry. I will often record through some presets that will have, you know, a lot of reverb, a lot of echo applied over the top of the drive. And I like them well enough to do some recording with those sounds. But if I can split up the signal chain this way and I can get more of that reverb sound on the clean track and let the drive be more direct, I often prefer that sort of sound. That's something that you can play with, right? Like I could take this guy and move it over and see what that sounded like. So that the entire signal chain gets it. These are all going to be choices that you are going to have to make as you dial in these presets. Now, all of that said, the thing that consistently comes up about this particular device as presets are being set is that they can't get a good overdriven sound. And one of the things that I want to stress here is that this boutique amp is already not a very overdriven amp. There are many more in here that are significantly more driven sounds. In addition, this overdrive is on, and it is contributing to part of that sound, but we have some other, tube screamers and overdrives in here that have way more distorted characteristics. And you're going to notice that for the guitar that I am playing, which already has very hot pickups, it really didn't take much gain to get where I was going. So this is, again, one of the reasons that I hate a lot of the presets that are in here is that they just jack up the gain on one of these high gain amps you plug in, and it sounds like you're playing through a bag of rocks. The gain levels are just wrong. And so for these presets, I think it's really important to actually come in and adjust gain levels and bring them up to a level that suits the instrument that you're playing through, because too much gain, especially through too many different preamp settings, can just be absolute noise. And let me see if we can make a demonstration of that case here without this being so loud that nobody wants to hear it. So I'm going to have to roll in my volume on the gX-10 gently here, and I'm going to have to do it through my guitar volume to get this done. So, for example, if I come to the presets that came with the device, and I just get started with heavy metal, that's number 2. It's not bad, but it's not good. And this is a complaint I actually have about most of the presets in this device. I just don't think they sound very good. And even some of the ones that I would expect to not be so distorted are. So like take Studio Blues, for example. Like let's say I wanted to do something very Stevie Ray Vaughan with some Studio Blues. Now, it's good, but it's still hot, right? Like that has more of like a Texas blues level of distortion on it, and some of that could be my guitar that I'm choosing to play through for this demonstration. But I think a lot of people are jumping in and finding that a lot of these sound way, way, way too heavy. Let's see. Let's try Modern Overdrive and see if that one makes our case as well. So, again, I think that is a decent place to start for a very metal sound. But the flip side of that is, I think I would probably choose to still come in and bring down this drive level, bring down this gain level, roll in the JC120 and see how it's contributing to the total gain sound. Roll in the X overdrive and see how it is contributing to that overall gain sound to dial in something that I want. Because relying on these, a lot of them just come in full metal, full hot, including ones that seem like they shouldn't be that hot. There are some other fun ones in here that I do enjoy. So, for example, I did find that Surf Cowboy was a decent starting point. It's a heck of a name, too, Surf Cowboy. But I think the reason that I liked it was it's not very hot. And if you notice, the signal chain is actually super, super simple. It didn't come with the boost on by default. If you go to the boutique amplifier, it's relatively set to the middle. It's already not a super hot amp. And so it gives me a sense to start somewhere that isn't just like, gain all the way to 11 sort of sound to work with. I also found that there is a very John Mayer-esque preset that is in here somewhere. And now that I'm looking for it, I'm not going to find it. But it is clearly the Slow Dancing in a Burning Room preset. That one was also pretty good, but hilariously the same thing. It was just a little bit too hot when I came. Oh, there it is. Slow Dance. Like, that's not close. That's too much. And I again, I have to stress, every guitar could be different. You could have the exact opposite set of pickups to me. You could come in here and be like, wow, that's actually exactly what I wanted to hear. But almost everyone who's listening to this is going to have some different guitar, and it is just going to sound different with these presets. So I'm going to come into this preset, I'm going to take this drive, and I'm going to bring it down. And you'll notice immediately that's closer. It's not the best John Mayer tone I could dial in. I'd have to sit here and mess with it. But just taking down that drive was a giant deal for me to be able to hear this amp preset and to be able to come into the level of drive that I wanted. And this is just going to be the reason that you, in my opinion, should rely on building some of your own presets rather than specifically going for these and starting literally from ground zero. Come into any given preset and just delete things out of it. There's no reason that you need to be stuck with all of these presets as they are defined, and play around with the signal splitting. I cannot stress enough how interesting your sounds can be, how big your sounds can be when you're doing this. Now, if you are still having difficulties finding some decent tones, it's worth noting that Tone Exchange is a great place to come find some tones, and I have some of my own that I've published, but you can come look through some other ones that other people have created and see if any of them happen to be anything that you would want. So, like, for example, I don't know this one at all, but this one says Dumble 80s. I could come in, I could download this, I could feel it out and see if it's a sound that I like, if it's basically a preset that's a little closer to something I might enjoy. And if you have not taken advantage of Tone Exchange yet, I think it's a really excellent place to go rather than just the presets built into the device, simply because of the fact that you're going to get far more interesting sounds that other people are creating. And you can even filter by genres that you want to listen to. So, maybe I would like a good blues sound. I can select blues and I can see who has labeled a blues type of, preset and who has gotten likes on their presets, who's getting downloads on those presets. And I could sign in and I could show you my presets, but that would be a little bit against the point, because the point here is there are so many good ones. One other popular YouTube channel, for example, is called Studio Rats. And let's go ahead and take off the blues filter on the Studio Rats stuff. But the Studio Rats gX-10 pack, I could download that immediately, and I could start playing with the Studio Rats pack. In fact, I don't know if I have it already. I don't think I do, and I should. I am certain that these are going to be better presets than the ones that are going to come built into the device. Give these a shot. If you have any that you do like, I also encourage you to publish them on Tone Exchange. I think it's really important that guitar players start to build a sense of community and build a sense of sharing, because at least when I first started, it was really difficult to understand any of these concepts and to understand how other guitarists were getting any of the things that they were getting. And in this digital age, we have this really, really awesome ability to share all of these presets and to share information about how we're creating all of those sounds. It's a thing that just 50 years ago would have been incredibly impossible. You would have been live, front stage, trying to squint and see a guitarist amplifier to understand what was going on. And short of that, you had to just guess and check until you could find something close. But now you can share exact signal chains. So give those things a shot. I hope that these put you down a little bit better of a path to finding a good preset. Please do leave me some comments if you have any additional questions, or if you feel like there's something along the way here that you would be interested in learning more about. Let me know in the comments. Thanks.